Hey everyone, it's John from Marco Learning. Welcome to our session for APUS History. I hope that you are all doing well tonight. Let me know in this chat, where are you coming from? And is this your first AP exam that you have ever taken in your life? For some of you, this is going to be quite an adventure. So what I want to do real quick is we're going to start off by going to one of the best resources you have for when you are cramming for the APUS History exam, and that is our APUS History Study Guide. This is completely free on our website. I have pinned this to the chat section. It's also in the description of this video. If you're watching the recording, you can go ahead and download it there. What we did for you all is a little Christmas present in the middle of May on the Cinco de Mayo for the APUS History exam, which is that we've got the entire exam broken down into little one-page guides for each of these different units. So we've got unit 1 here, we're calling period 1, that breaks down all of period 1 in just a page. We've got period 2 all the way through. So we're going to be referencing this throughout the stream. And I just want to encourage you, let us know in the chat the topics that we can help you with. In just a minute, we're going to be bringing on Tom Richey. In just a minute, we're going to be bringing on Marco the dog. So I'm John from Marco Learning. Marco, our mascot, is here. He is actually going to sleep because he says it's not worth it to cram at the last second. But maybe what we'll do is let's start with the man, the myth, the legend, Tom Richey, who can join us and kind of guide us through some of the best ways to get ready for this exam at the last minute. So Tom, whenever you're ready, you can hop in. I'm also going to bring up Marco. How's it going, Tom? Can you hear me?
All right, John. Hey there, John, and hey there, students. And yeah, that's great. It sounds like we're going to be seeing Marco the dog at some point during this. So, you know, we just had a nice session over on my channel, and coming over here to, you know, to Marco Learning, which of course, you know, if students aren't familiar with Marco Learning is supporting not only APUSH and, you know, not only, you know, the handful of subjects I support, you know, APUSH and AP Euro and government. So as far as that goes, you know, supporting a lot of other things as well. So make sure y'all are looking around at marcolearning.com and seeing some information about that. And so let's think about, okay, so there are folks here, and Quandale is off the grid. He's got his Kanye going on here, but I think, you know, having some good Kanye dragon energy, I think that's one thing, you know, if we're thinking about Kanye and we want to learn from Kanye for, you know, actually, I think I was looking at the wrong chat, but still, I mean, we can learn something from Kanye, thinking about, like, he's always confident about things. Okay. So, I mean, Kanye is, you know, yeah, I think that's the thing. Kanye's like, I'm going to go get that tape, you know, and he just goes and gets it. And, you know, so Kanye, you know, he kept bringing that confidence in there. And so with that, let's see what we've got here. You know, we see something about the Gilded Age. Okay, so as far as that goes, somebody wants the Gilded Age. Now, one thing that I think is very important here is thinking about, you know, like, you know, the Gilded Age represents, now, one of the critiques a lot of times that I have of the Gilded Age is that, you know, that people call it laissez-faire. Okay, so when we think about this, like, how laissez-faire was the Gilded Age? And I think the reason why people use this term is they compare it to what came after it rather than what came before it. So when you think about it, it's like when you look at it from the point of view of the progressives, where they're thinking in terms of government regulation of business, and then the Gilded Age, which I would not say was laissez-faire in the sense that there's a lot that the government actually is doing. You know, let me actually put something in the chat. You know, that's you know, a little handout that I was working on during a session one time. So let me just go ahead and do that. How laissez-faire was the Gilded Age?
And actually, as Tom is doing that, real quick, keep posting those topics that you guys want to cover in our session. This is going to be a dynamic session. We're going to respond to some of the things that you want to cover. I'm going to let Tom share his screen. I'm going to join the chat, and then later I'll come back here with Marco, and we'll get moving into some of the reviews that we have in our study guides.
So the thing is, like, you know, some people, they refer to the Gilded Age as laissez-faire. So I was thinking in terms of, what if we frame this as an LEQ prompt? Evaluate the extent to which laissez-faire economics influenced the policies of the United States government from the period from 1865 to 1900 that we, typically will call the so-called Gilded Age. Okay, so step one, we have to think of defining terms. So if you think of something like laissez-faire, part of the thing here is we've got to define laissez-faire. What is laissez-faire? What are we saying when we say laissez-faire? And I'm going to define it as a very limited government intervention in the economy, hands off, literally in French, let it be, laissez-faire, okay, which my French sucks, but I'm going to try, right? It's a written test, but with that, let it be, okay, just lazy, just the government just kind of let it be. Now, one thing that, about laissez-faire is laissez-faire does say that the government should punish fraud. So that's something to kind of think about as well. So again, depending on how you define it. So if somebody's looking at laissez-faire, I mean, you have unprecedented government interventions in the economy. If you were to take the Gilded Age and put it up against the Jacksonian period, the government is much more active in the economy. Like, this is Henry Clay's dream. Henry Clay struggled to get parts of the American system implemented during the antebellum period, but during the Gilded Age, a lot of this stuff, comes true. And so when we think about, like, the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Interstate Commerce Act, these are unprecedented regulations of business. Now, on the other hand, compared to the progressive era, there is very little regulation of large corporations. But again, more regulation than existed previously. Now, again, railroad subsidies, the land grants by the government to private corporations. Nothing laissez-faire about the government saying, here, private corporations, here's money to build railroads. In a laissez-faire economy, truly laissez-faire, these railroad companies would have been fully responsible for the risk of building the transcontinental railroads. And in fact, some railroads, such as James J. Hill's Great Northern Railroad, which was partly the subject of Teddy Roosevelt's Northern Securities case later on, he built it without any government subsidies at all, just taking in investors from the United States and Germany. And so then think about the strikes, that when there was a strike like the Great Railroad Strike or the Pullman Strike, the federal government, they used the Commerce Clause. They said these railroad strikes, they are inhibiting interstate commerce. And so it's time to send in troops. It's time to arrest people. It's time to break that strike. When Teddy Roosevelt during the Progressive era said, y'all come to the White House and let's talk, it was like, what? The government's not going to take the side of the business? And so with that, because Teddy Roosevelt's, no, I've got a square deal. And so the strike breaking policies, that, this is not laissez-faire. Now, on one hand, we could say on the laissez-faire side that there was no income tax, okay? That's something that, there was an attempt in 1894 to have an income tax, but that was struck down by the Supreme Court. So then, but on one hand, there was no income tax, but on the other hand, protective tariffs. There is nothing laissez-faire about a protective tariff. And that's where, when we think about the populist movement, okay? So when we think about the populist movement, that is something that is a the populist movement is basically a response to government policies like the protective tariff and the gold standard, things that were hurting the farm economy at the time. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with the gold standard, but the amount of currency, because the government was limiting the amount of silver that it put into circulation, that there was a shortage of currency. And so the economies, like, the farmers are like, we need more currency to circulate. So, but the other thing, remember that, William Jennings Bryan said in his Cross of Gold speech, if protection has killed its thousands, if the protective tariff has killed its thousands, the gold standard has killed its tens of thousands, okay? And that's one thing that we think of there, that, the gold standard, that is the money supply, that the government is, making sure that there's, that they're controlling the supply of money. And that's actually something you can think of too when you think about the gold standard. The populists wanted basically the free coinage of silver, like 16-to-1. They wanted more silver going. So this is basically the government regulation of the currency. Okay, so with that, and to a certain extent, government regulation of the currency can be good. We're dealing with inflation right now, and we're like, hey, the Federal Reserve needs to do something to slow this down. And so these are things, I mean, the gold standard is not laissez-faire. This is something that, this isn't banks issuing their own currencies. This is United States currency. Now, also, we'll note some things like social Darwinism and the gospel of wealth, okay? These are things that basically discouraged government-sponsored social welfare programs. The government should not step in and do things to give direct relief to poor people. So that's something that somebody could make an argument for laissez-faire. Now, another thing, though, and I would put this in the anti-laissez-faire column, the toleration of corruption, because this is something, now you could decide what you're going to do here with that, but I would put that in anti-laissez-faire because there's not supposed to be corruption in this kind of, in this situation. Even a laissez-faire economy, if there is corruption, then it's something that, is supposed to be prosecuted. So did laissez-faire economics influence economic policy during the Gilded Age to a great extent or to a limited extent? We have to make that call, okay? So when we think about this, let's think about the kind of thesis statements that we could write here. So simple thesis A: laissez-faire economics had a significant effect on economic policy during the Gilded Age. That is my claim. A thesis must first have a claim because there was limited regulation of business and there were not any policies in place to help people who were struggling. So you see here that I've got a claim and I've got my because, which means I'm going to go into how and or why. So, and I've got 2 points, which each of these is going to be the basis of a body paragraph. So simple thesis A and then simple thesis B: laissez-faire economics had a very limited impact on economic policy during the Gilded Age because the government repeatedly intervened in order to break strikes and passed laws that helped big businesses. So strike breaking, like when we're thinking about strike breaking, this is something with the Great Railroad Strike and the Pullman Strike. I could use these as specific evidence to support this claim, to support this line of reasoning that the government intervened in order to break strikes. And then laws that helped business, railroad subsidies, and the protective tariff. So I would use these kind of things to go into, so railroad, subsidies for the Transcontinental Railroad, right? So, all right. And so a complex thesis, okay, if we're trying to write a complex full credit essay, I could say something like this: laissez-faire economics had a very limited impact on economic policy during the Gilded Age because the government repeatedly intervened in order to break strikes and pass laws that helped big business. However, social Darwinist philosophies did have some influence in limiting the government's involvement. So what we'll see here is that we've got strike breaking and laws that helped business. On one side, I'm saying that, okay, this was not laissez-faire. And then I'm going to say here, social Darwinism, I'm going to say, okay, that is something that is laissez-faire. So I've got 2 arguments on one side, and then I've got 1 argument that is on the other side. Now, while I'm here, let's talk briefly about like captains of industry versus robber barons. People ask me this question, like, which one is it? Now, this is a question you have to answer this, okay? Different historians are going to make, different claims. So, for example, if you were reading like Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, it's probably going to go into robber barons. But robber barons presupposes that people like Rockefeller and Carnegie, they have stolen money from the American public. Whereas captains of industry, Rockefeller and Carnegie have legitimately profited from their efforts to modernize the United States economy. That Rockefeller and Carnegie, they are rich because we're all better off. They didn't force us to buy, nobody's like, forcing people to buy steel or forcing people to buy oil. When we think about oil before Rockefeller, 2 things: it was expensive and it might blow up, okay? Where oil after Rockefeller, much cheaper and it's not going to blow up. You can trust it. Standard Oil, this branding, Rockefeller's like, this is quality oil and it is better and cheaper than the oil you were buying before I came along. You're welcome. Now, also remember when you're thinking about philanthropy during the Gilded Age, which, I follow a teacher. If anybody's watching from Miss Worthy's classes, she is an alumna of Spelman College in Atlanta, which is named for John D. Rockefeller's wife. John D. Rockefeller married into a family that had been prominent abolitionists. And so they gave this money to start this college. So Spelman College is a historically Black college for women. And so Black women weren't really getting a lot of government funds that time. The government's not like, oh, we need to provide good educations for Black women. Well, that's where the Rockefellers come in. So the gospel of wealth, let's not dismiss it as something that's just like, oh, they're making an excuse for this or that. That Carnegie and Rockefeller, they're doing things that are, having very real impacts. Okay. And of course, you can't argue that they're doing some of these things to, for the sake of their image and stuff like that. But at the same time, when Carnegie is making all of these libraries, this is something that this is something that's helping people. And so as far as that goes, I think that's an important thing to note. And so from there, and remember, there are some free study guides available at marcolearning.com, and make sure y'all are following Marco Learning on the internet, right? On Instagram. I was about to just say on the internet. What am I saying here? It's the night before the exam. I've been broadcasting all week. And so as far as that goes, let's go ahead. I'm going to be turning this over to John shortly. Okay, John and Marco. Now, do I get to see Marco or not? Y'all let me know, because John, I'm going to be running over to the Euro review pretty soon. So I just want to make sure that I'm able to say hey to Marco. I'm very much hoping for that. So we'll see. And let's see what people are saying now. Blowing up the chat. Stay focused, please. Nod says, okay, that guy's about to that's some 5 energy right there. Okay. Might blow up as in literally, JVV pass. Might blow up as in literally. Now, as far as that goes, blowing up figuratively, now y'all are going to blow up the chat, because here he is. Hey, Marco. Hey, Marco. All right. How you doing,
He's just
buddy?
Hanging. This man gave up. He's been sleeping this whole review. You talked about Gilded Age. He didn't care. He wanted a treat, and he was done. We're going to bring him back at the end of all this, Tom.
Tell us, Tom. Well, I am very glad that I got to see this. This is incredible. I'm just always, that Marco energy, and hopefully y'all will do better on the exam tomorrow than when Marco takes it. Okay, because I don't think that's going to go very well. I haven't actually met Marco. He's such a cute dog, but he's not that smart.
No, that's Tom Richey immediately graded his DBQ as a 0 as soon as he saw him. He was like, no thesis, no contextualization, no evidence, definitely no complexity.
Yeah, no complex understanding for sure.
So Tom, real quick, I want to talk about your channel and why this playlist you have parked at the top of your page is going to be so helpful for all our crammers, especially our West Coast people. What are the videos we should be watching from this playlist as we're watching some things tonight that you think are going to really help?
One thing that I'll note, John, is my APUSH offerings are a lot more plentiful in the earlier part of the course.
Yeah.
And that tends to be a lot of times what people are needing when they're coming into this. I find that, when I'm giving last minute sessions to tutoring clients, a lot of times they're wanting to start from the beginning. They're like, let's just take it from the beginning. And usually they'll want me to go through reconstruction or something like that, because they're like, I've done the rest of it pretty recently. So I think that, looking through some of these things and thinking about, I always tell people, think about something that is high interest. It's something you want to study, and something that you're like, hey, I kind of forget about that. So when you're scrolling through, don't focus on things that you think are boring, unless, now, if it gets to be about like 11:30 and you're still not sleepy, then maybe kind of think about like, oh, let me start reading about like, organized labor in the 1880s or something like that, or, family structures in whatever time, or, like, let me read about like, urban planning. And, there are things that you can start reading about. You're going to be like, and you'll get that sleep you've been needing. But other than that, I would say that it's important to think in terms of what of what you're interested in doing. So it's like, you know what, I haven't seen that one in a while, and I wanna focus on that. That would be my advice for that. But I want to wish everybody a just a great time. Now remember, Marco and I will be there for AP Government if you're taking that next year. Also, some people take AP European History. And of course, John, is here with Marco, and Marco is serving so many subjects, and even subjects that seniors normally take. Also, I'm leaving you in good hands here. John has years and years of test prep, and so this guy, there are people. He's not going to tell you this, but there are people who've put him on a plane and flown him across oceans to prepare their kids for test. Nobody's ever done that for me. Sometimes people get me on the Zoom or something, we'll get on a hangout, we'll do online tutoring, but people have physically said, John, we need you to get on a plane to prepare our kid for a test on another continent. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm leaving y'all in the best of hands. John, it's always a pleasure, and I'll see you, I guess, around 9 for the AP Euro, little AP Euro action.
That's right. Thank you, Tom. Everyone, let's say we love Tom Richey in the chat as he heads out the door. And best of luck, Tom, as you're helping students on your channel and on your crowdcast. Have a great night. Here's what we're going to do, everyone. I want to share my screen and guide you all through. I'm going to close out some of this. I've got my YouTube stream over here, and I'll close that out as well. And I'm taking you to a study guide pack that we have available for free on our website. That actually, it's right here on the free study guides page. So I'm going to pop this in the chat again, and it's pinned to the top of the chat so you can get it. So here's what we did. We took the entire AP US history course and we put it into 9 pages. So guess what I'm going to do live on YouTube right now for all of you? We're going to go through all 9 pages real quick and redo the entire course. So if you've been asking about a particular time period, it is here for you. Let's go to period 1, which is unit 1 from 1491, just before Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492 to 1607, which is when we see those first Puritan colonies come together. This period is only about 5% of the exam, and it will not appear on the DBQ. So as you look at this image and you think about the big story, this is not something you need to obsess with. We're going to move pretty quickly through this. So we know, again, 5% of the exam. One idea, they used to call these key concepts. Now they have the different topics, but this is kind of useful for really simplifying the unit. Key concept 1.1. As native populations, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, migrated and settled across the vast expanse of North America over time, they developed distinct and increasingly complex societies. So you need to know that Native American societies were different from one another. The Pueblo peoples and the Hopi peoples of the Southwest were different from the Lenape in New Jersey, where I am from, right? They were complex societies. Some of them were nomadic, some of them were sedentary. Nomadic means you pack up your tent or your teepee on your horse or animal and you move across the country or across large terrain. Sedentary means you have irrigation or farming or animals that kind of park you in one place. That's some of the complexity we see. They adapted to and transformed their diverse environment. So we look at maize cultivation in the American Southwest. We look at hunting buffalo in the Great Plains. These are the things that the native peoples accomplished in America on the eve of the European conquest, or the arrival of Europeans, or what they're calling here contact. The contact among Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans resulted in what's called the Colombian Exchange. So if you need to know one key term from this time period, it's definitely the Colombian Exchange, not for the nation of Colombia and not for the District of Columbia, but for Christopher Columbus, whose name is the origin of all of those. The Colombian Exchange is the movement of people and goods and diseases and animals up and down across borders. In fact, we put on here, this is super zoomed in, right? But here is what that Colombian Exchange looks like. So we see that things like yams and potatoes and peppers and pineapples move from the Americas over to Europe and Africa. And we see that things that move from here include lemons and onions and olives and cow and wheat and bees. And of course, this symbol over here on the right, which are the diseases that killed approximately 90% of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. So the Colombian Exchange is a story of fruits and vegetables and animals and disease. It's a story of the movement of people. So we see some of these these features down here, there's these key terms. So maize cultivated in the American Southwest. And we see the Colombian Exchange had significant social, cultural, and political changes on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, let me warn you about something. It says social, cultural, and political changes. That's a phrase that gets people trapped, right? Because they think that they've got to, list this in their thesis or use this in their DBQ or LEQ. Avoid these overly general phrases. Social and cultural and political is really referring to everything. Now, we included a little timeline here, some basic things like Spain establishing the encomienda system in 1512. And when you look at encomienda, this is something that is now kind of notorious and infamous. It's a forced labor system in which the American Indians, the indigenous peoples, were brought into subject labor by the Spanish. The abuse of indigenous peoples by the Spanish becomes an important theme if you ever read Bartolomé de las Casas or any of these sources. Now, there's a lot more to say. We actually summarize it all here. You're thinking, I can't keep up with this guy. Like, what is going on? I'm going to pop this link back in the chat. Well, I'm going to say link to guide that's also here. I'll also remind you, as I'm just looking at this, if you like this video, press that like button, subscribe to our channel. We've opened up the chat for subscribers only to make sure that we keep the chat very focused. So period one, not the most important unit on the APUS history course, one that covers really simple ideas, but stuff you did a while ago. Stuff that you did, for example, the encomienda system, or this acronym, God, Gold, and Glory. What motivated the people who came from Europe to take over the Americas? They were motivated by the desire to convert people to the Christian faith or Catholic faith. The gold, which was the desire literally to get gold and silver in the New World, and glory for people to make a name for themselves by conquering the New World. So the first unit is there. Let's go to the second unit. Things start to get a little more interesting. Also, not part of what you're going to see on the DBQ. So this is really significant as we think of the exam just being a few hours away. This is not where the exam is focused its attention. It's also America before America. It's hard for us to wrap our head around this, but the United States of America was basically three different countries. And I'm just going to zoom in and get a nice kind of shape here. And you can see the three different countries that were the United States of America. I'm going to annotate on my screen for just a minute here, right? Here's the part that I live in. I live right over here in central New Jersey, where only the strong survive, as we say. This is the English part of the Americas. This part up in blue is the French part, and this part down in green is the Spanish part. The United States is really the confluence of three nations, England, France, and Spain, who all kind of crashed into each other. Now, the English language ended up kind of winning out. It was this expansion westward. Let me know in the chat, what was the thing that basically took New France, this territory in blue, and you can see it's basically the same shape. What happened in 1803 that made all of this part of English-speaking America? This is something you should definitely know for the exam. It's one of those critical turning points. America as America is inconceivable today without this incredible moment of New France becoming part of America. So we look at these different colonies. They had different motives, different ways of kind of entering into the American landscape. So let's take a look at these key concepts. And we see key concept 2.1 here, which says Europeans developed a variety of colonization and migration patterns influenced by different imperial, that's empire, goals, cultures, and very North American environments. So it depended on where you settled. If you settled in Mexico and the American Southwest, you ended up in a different climate, a different topography with different indigenous peoples than the peoples who lived in the nice cold parts of Indiana and Michigan. Shout out to all my Michiganders and Indianans. I went to grad school for history in the University of Notre Dame. I was cold for like 4 months a year, but it's a very special territory. And the University of Notre Dame is Notre Dame du Lac, the Our Lady of the Lake. It was founded by French Catholics. So you see this legacy of a kind of a New France in this part of America. So they competed with each other and American Indians for resources. So especially New France and New England were fighting each other for access to fur trading, access to waterways, access to goods, and they were fighting with indigenous people, which is why we have a name like the French and Indian War. So pretty straightforward, this sort of main concept of Unit 2 of APUS history, which is that the European peoples came to different regions with different motives and had different relationships. Okay, another one here, key concept 2.2, the British colonies participated in political, social, cultural, and economic exchanges with Great Britain that encouraged both stronger bonds with Britain and resistance to British control. So we're obsessed with the British because it's the British English-speaking domain that ends up becoming America as we know it, even though we know this story is complex. And this period of time, let me zoom out a little bit for a second here. This period of time from 1607 to 1754 is a time period in which, we're seeing the formation of both robust British colonies and people who are starting to defy and resist and develop their own culture and their autonomy. So great. And I'm looking really quickly at the chat, some great commentary and feedback. Again, if you like this video, press that like button. And if you want to get access to these free study guides, just press on the link that's pinned at the top of the chat. So we see the timeline here. The first 1607 is the first English colony that was founded at Jamestown, which is in modern day Virginia. We have Pilgrims signed the Mayflower Compact. So this is a good thing, like a nice little detail. If you're setting up some contextualization for your DBQ, it's a little bit early because the earliest the DBQ could appear is 1754, but maybe by 1620, you're seeing something earlier. We see Anne Hutchinson is banished for organizing religious meetings for women. Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams. We see the witch trials, the Salem witch trials. We're seeing religion become more complicated. Remember, the Puritans came as religious refugees. They became as ardent believers in Reformed Protestant Christianity. What happens, we're going to see by the end of this period, is something we call the First Great Awakening. I was getting some questions about this. The best way to think about the First Great Awakening is that in the 1740s, two people, Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, spelled George Whitefield, but George Whitefield, began a revival of the Puritan colonies. And they felt that people had lost their way. People got distracted. People lost their commitment to traditional Protestant Christianity. And so this was this incredible revival movement that comes to define part of the reason why America is more religious, as the United States of America is more religious than many other industrialized and developed nations. One of those legacies is that First Great Awakening in the 1740s. So you see what I'm doing, everyone? You notice how I'm like a little Wikipedia article machine here, right? I'm spitting out 2 to 3 sentences because I'm showing you as I'm talking what contextualization looks like. In contextualization, you give like 1 or 2 sentences that really break down what, laid the foundation for other things in US history and, get specific. I mentioned Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, that's specific. I mentioned the 1740s. I mentioned Protestant Christianity. I mentioned this sense of losing one's way and a desire to revive and recover it. That is a specific, robust description of the First Great Awakening. So good. And I'm seeing this is overall really, guys are doing great in the chat. Thank you for being amazing. We can turn slow mode on to a longer period if we need to, because we got just about 700 people in here. And again, if you, the chat is for our subscribers, don't forget, we have a gigantic playlist on our YouTube channel for APUS history. In fact, I'm going to show that to you real quick, which is over here on our channel. So if you look on the main page of Marco Learning, and I'm going to go right here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen real quick for US history. So you see on our channel, here's where we are. This US history channel, this is me breaking down all these key concepts. Here's Tom Richey doing Unit 1, all the way through the entire course, including things that break down the DBQ and that cover a lot of material that I think could be really helpful for you. So, okay, I'm going to reshare these study guides and bring us back into period 2, an important period, but not nearly as important as about what we're going to get to, right? So, and here, by the way, we see the First Great Awakening, again, the encomienda system. One thing that people always are grateful they know is mercantilism, or sometimes pronounced mercantilism. And this is basically the economic system that the British believed in, where countries are trying to basically get a favorable trade balance, export more stuff, send more stuff out, make more money from what you sell than from what you buy. More money that you're selling from what you're buying. It's a simple idea, but grabbing colonies around the world helps you do this. And that's the system that governed how the British did things. So go to this study guide, highlight, this is a PDF, you can mark it all up. Mercantilism is one of those words you definitely want to know. Cash crops is a pretty straightforward idea, right? You cultivate a lot of tobacco in order to, sorry, I have a dog stuck underneath me. Maybe we should do a dog break in a minute. Cash crops are like tobacco and cotton. You're not selling them to feed your family. You're selling them in bulk to make a lot of money. And that's how a lot of the Virginia colonies were originally established. So this is all of what we're going to get in period 2 that breaks down some of these core ideas. But what I want you to remember from period 2 is this. The colonies that make up America are forming. They are New England, New France, and New Spain. And eventually, through the weird mathematics of the next 150 years, they're going to combine into this incredible country that is the United States of America. Now let's enter into the DBQ period. Now we're in the territory of what could appear on the DBQ tomorrow. My friend Emily Glankler over at Antisocial Studies, she's going live on TikTok in a few minutes. She talked about, she's speculating that the DBQ could involve this period. This is when the United States of America became its own country and just straight up broke away from Great Britain. So let's go into these key concepts together. I'm going to zoom in nice and big. So if you're watching on mobile or somewhere else, you can see it. British attempts to assert tighter control over its North American colonies and the colonial resolve to pursue self-government led to a colonial independence movement and the Revolutionary War. British attempts to assert tighter, this is such an awkwardly written thing, which is written by the College Board, but basically the British wanted to control the colonies and the colonists wanted to run their own show. And that's what caused the Revolutionary War. So one thing that could absolutely show up on this exam tomorrow that you could cite is the Revolutionary War that created the nation of the United States of America was caused both by the colonists really wanting to make their own country and the British government cracking down on them like, no, you can't do anything. It's terrible. It's awful. It's ghastly. And they cracked the whip and they taxed the Americans, and Americans resisted more. And that's what the 1760s and 1770s are. The Americans want to break away, and the British, with their tea and their teeth and their accents, came in and tried to control everything with the Stamp Act and the Molasses Act and the Sugar Act and all these things. And it did not work. And that, don't quote me on that in the DBQ tomorrow. It's not going to help you. Don't quote any of that. Sugar Act and Tea Act and not picking on British people. Key concept 3.2, the American Revolution's democratic and republican ideals and inspired new experiments with different forms of government. So this is something that's really incredible. All these people begin to take over the government that is the American colonies, and then they decide all of a sudden to begin experimenting. They make the Articles of Confederation. They make the Constitution of the United States. They add the Bill of Rights. All of these things are figuring out a new kind of government. Can you imagine what that must have been like? The founding fathers of the United States of America are like, we don't have a king. We don't have the parliament. We don't have any of this stuff. What are we going to do? So actually what they did, true story, is they kind of made a part-time king. So let's talk about this for a second. The current government of the United States is basically like a modified British government. Instead of King George III, you got George Washington, who had ruled for 2 terms as an executive. Instead of the House of Commons and the House of Lords, you get the House of Representatives and the Senate. Okay, that's super different. And then you have, instead of all the courts, you have the Supreme Court and the courts underneath it. You have 3 branches of government, the executive, the judicial, and the legislative, each taking their own kind of power and each reflecting something from like the British mindset from which the founding fathers came. So those experiments in government specifically involve the 3 branches of government, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. If you're talking about those things, that is really what's going to help you get specific. Don't feel like you have to make stuff up when you're talking about this. Talk about the Constitution, talk about the Articles of Confederation. And if you're not sure kind of what those are, remember, we've got some definitions here down here that explain the difference between the Articles, the Constitution, the Federalist Paper, and the Bill of Rights. So I'm going to defer to this study guide pack. Again, I'll pop this in the chat for you all. It's right here on our website. And yeah, by the way, there's a bunch of new people who've just joined us. I'm John from Marco Learning. We are walking through all of these materials. We just had Tom Richey on the air. We just had my dog Marco here. Tom is going to be live on his channel again and live on this one for AP Euro. So definitely check us out for those resources as well. Now, this Articles of Confederation was the first attempt to make a government. It was not very effective, and so it got replaced. And here we get the preamble to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all of this. So, one question I just got in the chat, that's a good one here from Rohan, is what Supreme Court cases do you recommend that we memorize? There's only a few that you really need to know. We're going to get to them as we go through this. One would be Marbury v. Madison, which we'll get to in a minute, and then all the way up to maybe Brown versus the Board of Education. You have to memorize 15 Supreme Court cases for the AP US government course. You don't for AP US history. So this is not a trivia test. This is not a test of all the things that you should know about the Supreme Court or what happened in Article 3 of the Constitution. Like, nobody cares. But you should feel very comfortable with these documents broadly for the AP US history DBQ, which could very well, if anti-social studies is right, could end up being on period 3. Period 4 is my least favorite period of American history. Can we talk about how boring this period is? I mean, look at this painting. It's very pretty, but like, I'm already bored, right? I would rather have my phone out. I feel like want to check my notifications. In fact, who is this? Somebody just texted me. Yeah, okay. So good. Actually, there's one other question I just got from, so I'm ignoring that one. From Hannah, which was, what presidents do I definitely need to memorize? So true story. One of the reasons why I was such a nerd in the 4th grade was that I memorized all the presidents of the United States and can recite them in like 25 seconds, which I might do as like a party trick at the end of this if you guys demand it. But that helped me kind of sort out like where everything is in American history. You definitely don't need to do that. You can't do it tonight. And memorization is not your goal. It's 8:12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You do not want to be like focusing on cramming stuff in your head. You want to focus on reminding yourself about what's really important. So let's take stock of where we are. The United States at the beginning of Unit 4 is a brand new country. It's very weak financially and otherwise. In 1812, it's about to get reinvaded by England, right? Like, this is not a strong country. So this is a period where period 3, 1754 to 1800 is how the basic government is forming. This is all kind of pre-America that we just covered. So these study guides are bringing us through a story of an emerging nation. We know the end of the story. We know the United States is going to be a very powerful, very wealthy, dominant force. The United States of America is the wealthiest and most powerful nation that has ever existed by far. And it invented like YouTube and Marco Learning study guides, right? So it's like all, which are equivalently powerful technologies that came out of this incredible nation. In 1800 to 1848, it wasn't obvious it was going to end up there. This is, by the way, this is a gorgeous painting. I'm going to zoom in so we can just like take it in for a second. This is what we call the Hudson River School. It's a great little kind of beautiful name that helps you, or beautiful kind of art that helps you see America, a uniquely American style emerge. I did get a question in the chat about kind of how long our stream is going to be. I think we're officially scheduled to end at 8:30, but I'm going to finish when I finish this. Definitely in the next 45 minutes, I got to finish because I got AP European History coming on this channel at 9 p.m. So a few key concepts that happen. In fact, I'm going to walk us through here on the timeline. So earlier, I asked you all, what was the thing that doubled the size of the United States and brought New France into New England? That was the federal government finalizing the Louisiana Purchase. Louisiana from France, Louis, it was purchased from Napoleon. I think it was something like $15 million. It's the best real estate deal in human history. The French were desperate. They sold the land. probably halfway illegal, but whatever. We have all of like middle America as a result of that deal in 1803. In 1807, the Congress voted to end the international slave trade. This is the beginning of moving the chess pieces in place to end the slave trade in this country, rather to end slavery in this country, but it would take another 60 years for that to happen officially. In 1812, the US declares war against Britain. That was the War of 1812. So just incredibly, I want you to imagine the year's 1812. There's like 5 people in America. There's no California. And the United States has just declared war against Britain, which it just broke away from, and British troops like burned down the White House part of it. So an incredible moment, and it shows the frailty and the weakness of the United States of America in these early years. So when you're thinking of period 4 or unit 4, think of weakness, think of a country finding its identity, an identity defined by the Hudson River School, and an identity defined by this new territory. So the United States is moving westward, this yellow territory. It acquires Louisiana, it explodes in growth. Like one day in 1803, people woke up to their newspapers with their pipe in their mouth and we're like, wait, what? Our country just doubled. And then what we see in green is that Spanish territory. So moving through, we see the Louisiana Purchase, the ending of the international slave trade, the US declaration of war against Britain in the War of 1812, 1820, one of the first things that happened where the chess pieces are moving into place for these compromises. What I want you to think about the causes of the Civil War, here's what I want you to think about. The northern states became largely free states. The southern states became entirely slave states. And then this awkward balancing act. Every time we add a free state in the north, we got to add a slave state in the south. Or every time we add a slave state in the south, we have to add a free state in the north to create a natural stalemate. And they did this from 1820 to 1860, when it exploded into violence with the election of Abraham Lincoln. The country was plunged into war and 600,000 troops died. Americans killing other Americans over the issue of slavery, because for 40 years, the nation held its breath. The first moment of this, you're going to see right here in the study guide as the Missouri Compromise, right? The first attempt to try to let's get this right and keep people happy. This is a lesson of history for all of us. When you avoid the difficult subject, when you just postpone it, just like the founding fathers did with slavery, you end up with this stalled thing, and you can actually make something like the Civil War a lot worse. We know in 1823 that James Monroe, the 5th president of the United States, declared the Monroe Doctrine. That's another one of those things you don't have to memorize, but just remind yourself of. Let me know in the chat, have you heard of the Monroe Doctrine? Have you never heard? There's Marco getting up. Have you never heard of the Monroe Doctrine? Do you know it very well? So, because this is one of these things where, Marco, come over here. Come over here, Marco. All right, we're going to take a Marco break real quick while he's here. Come on, Marco. The people want to see you. Oh. So we interrupt this APUS history review with all sorts of meaningful things about the Monroe Doctrine to bring you Marco, our founder. Marco, stop looking captive. Smile. Smile. All right, tell me what you think of Marco in the chat. If you love him, give him a little love emoji or sheep emoji or something. There he is. Say hi to your people. Okay, I'm gonna let him down now. Oh. Okay, I'm out of breath. He's actually like 350 pounds, people. It's fur, it's lamb meat. So anyway, Monroe says, hey, Western countries, European countries, you've got to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. You've got to let America be America. Let the Americas, Simon Bolivar, the Latin American countries do their own thing. This would also be a step in that direction of America going from a weak country to one of the most powerful countries in the world. 1830, Andrew Jackson, the first super aggressive president of the United States, a president who liked vetoes, who liked to be the strong man, who liked to defy the Supreme Court. This president is guilty of the Trail of Tears and the destruction of Native American life in the 1830s. And it was always be a sort of a stain on his legacy, even though his legacy also entails the strength of the executive emerging for the first time, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. The narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an abolitionist and a former slave whose story many of us have read. I've read it and taught it. It's an incredibly powerful text. It's the rise of abolitionism. Abolition is, and I think, do we have abolition here? No, we have some of these other terms, but abolition is the movement to end slavery, which is starting to lay its foundations here. And then we have a key moment up in Seneca in New York State, up by the Finger Lakes. This is the Women's Convention that demanded rights for women. So we're starting to see the seeds of a lot of these things. The Second Great Awakening is much less important than the first. And it's an important thing to keep in mind that religious revivals and religious independence, so to speak, is part of the American way. European countries are tied to in England, it's the head of the Church of England, who is the monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, or the Pope in Rome. The United States has Catholics, Protestants, evangelicals, Anabaptists, Mormons. It has Muslims and Hindus and Jews and Buddhists, all kinds of people under this big umbrella. And religious revivalism, religious diversity is part of the story you need to know about. One other one, I mentioned upstate New York. If you live in upstate New York, if you've ever been there, you can see signs of the Erie Canal, of the infrastructure that was built in the 1820s under the direction of Senator Henry Clay, whose American system was about internal improvements and building up America to have kind of a great infrastructure to really thrive. So we're seeing a country laying the foundation for rights for Black people and for women. We're seeing laying the foundations for the Civil War with these compromises. We're seeing laying the foundations for America as a superpower with the Monroe Doctrine. We're seeing laying the foundations of modern American religious independence and energy in the Second Great Awakening. That is now, and the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the country. Here's an image that is very famous. It's the image of Manifest Destiny. She is bringing in her billowing garments all of the peoples of America westward with her light. And this is the story of American expansion westward during this time period. So here I'm going to actually do this with the key concepts again. And I'm looking real quick at the chat. Lots of people are joining us. Thank you for joining us here at Marco Learning. If you like this video, press that like button. And if you want to join the chat, press the subscribe button. We have a gigantic playlist for AP US history. And in fact, I'm going to real quick just bring that up onto the screen to show you what you're going to do when this is over. And you're saying, what do we do when this is over? I break down with my friend Tom Richey, all of these different topics within the AP US history curriculum. And in fact, in our AP US history playlist, you can see, this is right at the top of our channel, not just every single topic in the entire course, but when we write and grade DBQs and LEQs all through the entire curriculum. So I want to take us back to period 5. This is the period from 1844 to 1877. So it says, key concept 5.1, the United States became more connected with the world, okay, was something we talked about with the Monroe Doctrine. Pursued an expansionist foreign policy. So it's a foreign policy that's saying, how do we grow in the Western Hemisphere? And emerged as the destination for many migrants from other countries. So this is when Irish immigrants and Irish Catholics fleeing the Irish potato famine in the 1840s, or German Catholics came in to the United States. So there's many people in America who are descended in one way or another from the Irish and German and especially Catholic immigrants who came in during that time period. That's the emergence, besides the colony of Maryland, of Catholicism as a major religion in America. Key concept 5.2, intensified by expansion and deepening regional divisions. Debates over slavery and other economic, cultural, and political issues led the nation into civil war. So basically, like, what caused the Civil War? Everything, right? It was debates over slavery, plus economic factors, plus cultural factors, plus political differences. The North was much more urban. It was much more politically and religiously liberal. The North was much more diverse. Its economy was different. It also began to despise what the institution of slavery stood for, and Southerners began to entrench themselves in what slavery stood for. And that led to a cultural, political, economic divide that was fundamental to causing the Civil War. Many things caused the Civil War. The primary cause was slavery and the debates over it, but there was all the things around it that mattered too. Key concept 5.3, the Union victory in the Civil War. So the North is the Union and the South is the Confederacy. The Union in the Civil War and the contested Reconstruction of the South settled the issues of slavery and secession. Slavery being, can one human own another? No, as of the 13th Amendment. And secession, can one state just up and break away when it feels like it? No, obviously. It's something we had to sort out with the war, but left unresolved many questions about the power of the federal government and citizenship rights. The thing about a democracy that you need to keep in mind, and this is something you can talk about in your essays, is that the tension between protecting the majority, the democracy that's at the heart of our idea of what we are as a government, from the tyranny of the majority. What happens when the majority of people want to vote to segregate schools? What happens when the majority of people are wrong? How do we protect individual citizens from the power of the majority? Democracy is never perfect, right? Because people are never perfect. And so the founding fathers saw this and they wanted to restrain the people. Go to the chat right now and tell me about specific ways that the founding fathers of the United States tried to restrain the power of democracy unfettered. That basically, they put barriers between individual Americans who step into a voting booth and vote and the expression of what they voted for. So let me know in the chat. I'm going to give it a minute real quick. And I see a bunch of really great on-topic comments overall. Thank you very much. And again, if you're joining our video just now, press that like button, subscribe if you want to join the chat. We have a gigantic playlist for you of everything in APUS history and the free study guides that we pinned to this chat. So yeah, something like checks and balances is one of those things. We look at things like the Electoral College. Joy, you've got that exactly right. The Electoral College is saying you shouldn't directly vote for the president. We're going to put this check in place to prevent you from doing this. The three branches of government, a lot of people are picking the Electoral College. Basically, property requirements, right? We don't want actually, nobody really believes in pure democracy. First of all, as a voter, I'll tell you right now, I don't want to read like 9,000 million pages of laws. Like I can't, I'm only halfway through this study guide. It's taking me an hour. How do you think I'm going to be able to see? Especially I'll be like looking for 10-second TikToks that summarize what's actually happening about the law. So, that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that voters don't want to be like lawmakers full time. And when they are, they can also get distracted or not know what they need to do regarding infrastructure or very nuanced things. Or they might really want slavery or segregation or something that a court or other people might say is a bad thing. So you guys are giving some really great examples of some of those limits on true freedom. So we're seeing this emerge in this period. This is the period of the Civil War. You do not need to know the battles of what Stonewall Jackson did on Christmas Day or whatever in Roanoke, or I don't even know, Gettysburg happened, something. None of that matters. This course is focused on the causes of the Civil War, the effects of it, and Reconstruction. So don't feel crowded with all this information, right? I'm not trying to bombard you with statistics. I'm trying to bombard you with good ideas that link parts of the course together, that make things make sense. And one thing that makes sense is manifest destiny, an idea that is at the heart of America, that we are called to take over the whole continent. So when we look at the map of the United States, we were just looking at one a minute ago, right? The idea, and this is so weird to us now, it's hard to envision, but that these people, the English peoples who expanded westward into the United States, then in 1803 awkwardly doubled themselves up overnight and made this big old blob that is America in 1803, eventually feel called to move westward. Let me know in the chat, do I have people who live in this arrow territory in Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Utah, all the places that Americans as migrants crossed over the frontier to inhabit. And that's a very interesting, I think, idea and way of kind of conceiving of what this country is. It wasn't inevitable, right? But I think it became inevitable as Americans began to believe in this idea that they were inexorably being pulled to the West. So here's what I want to do. I'm zooming out in period 5. We're halfway through the APUSH course. People, I got to get live on AP Euro in 30 minutes, so we got to get moving. And I want to take, and here, by the way, Reconstruction is the period after the Civil War. Let's get into this period, this sort of immediately after the Civil War. America is America today because it got industrialized again. The first industrial revolution was about those looms and mills and turning away from farming and turning into factories. Period 6, we see the rise of skyscrapers and cities and train stations and the kind of infrastructure that makes the modern world. So we see, I'm going to actually go do this one through key concepts as well, which was, again, this is the old way that APUSH was set up. It was a really great way to cram the night before. And after this is all over, I'm going to help you, get through all of this real quick. And I'm just seeing, okay, great. Thank you in the chat there. Key concept 6.1, technological advances, large-scale production methods, and the opening of new markets encourage the rise of industrial capitalism in the United States. So industrial capitalism is a term you want to know. Capitalism is a system where you largely let businesses run themselves. You have some regulation, but not too much. Industrial means you have the power of the second industrial revolution, those steam engines and Bessemer processed steel and all the stuff that's fueling this, that creates the robber barons and super powerful companies. Key concept, so we have all of these things led to the growth of the second industrial revolution. Key concept 6.1 is saying there were several factors that led to the second industrial revolution. Key concept 6.2, the migrations that accompanied industrialization. So people started moving, jobs started happening in cities. So people leave their farms, they leave places, and they move to the cities. It transformed urban areas, lots more people in cities. Cities are growing fast. There's actually public sanitation issues. There's crime issues. There's so much going on you got to get right. And rural issues began to, not in the late 1800s, but eventually begin to experience the decline that defines those regions. America is not a farming society anymore. And this is the beginning of that long, long journey. And that caused dramatic social and cultural change. So key concept 6.3, the Gilded Age. This is what Tom Richey started with when we were at the beginning of all of this. It produced new cultural and intellectual movements, public reform efforts, and political debates over economic and social policies. As income inequality seems to get so much worse in the late 19th century, people begin to look for reforms, ways of improving all this. So a lot to discuss in period 6, a critical period, I think a more exciting period than maybe what we were looking up here, all this boring part of America, 5 people painting rivers, to a much more robust, dynamic, energetic nation. We see the rise of basically the creation of reservations among Native American peoples. We see this term, the robber barons, a kind of a very judgmental term against the business leaders who, like Rockefeller and Carnegie and Morgan, and people who began to make so much money, what felt like it was at the expense of ordinary workers. And that's what leads to labor reforms in these movements. Here's just a picture of an America that the founding fathers couldn't have conceived of at this level. A robust, bustling city made out of steel, growing, filled with immigrants from all over the world, rather especially from Southern Europe. So in that period from around 1880 to 1920, waves of immigrants coming from Poland, Russia, Greece, Italy, other parts of Europe like Germany as well. We're seeing more Catholics, Jews, diverse groups entering into the United States. So my family, my father's side comes from Italy. They came through Ellis Island in New York City right at this moment. They were Italian Catholics. They were very poor, and they came from the southern parts of Italy on kind of a dream to the United States. So that was the moment at which very many Americans, especially on the East Coast, can trace part of their legacy. Let's take a look at some of the key concepts from this period. This is an absolutely gigantic period. It's got 2 world wars, the immigrants I just mentioned, the progressive era, the Great Depression, the Roaring 20s. It's so crazy. We're not going to cover it all, but I just want to briefly point out growth expanded opportunity, while economic instability led to new efforts to reform US society and its economic system. So the US is becoming a superpower, and these new efforts to reform US society are happening. And this is creating this tension. It's like we're growing really quickly, but now we have new problems. And we see this in things like the progressive era and everything else. Innovations in communications and technology contributed to the growth of mass culture. What does that mean? It means everyone's reading the same stuff. Everyone is wearing the same kinds of clothes, which we're now an extreme version of, right? You talk to someone and you're like, did you see that viral video? You're like, we all saw it. The algorithm is all sending us to the same place. Looks like, by the way, I got the algorithm sent you all here. I got almost 1,000 people in here. So again, if you like this video, press that like button. Definitely take a minute to subscribe. You can join the chat. You can also check out the entire gigantic playlist that we have sitting here on this channel for when the stream is over. And you're all like, stay longer. No, watch these videos. They're all here for you. And later tonight, we're going to be going live for AP US History and or AP European History. I'll also point out, if you have not yet, checked out our TikTok channel. I don't know if any of you follow us on TikTok, but we have about 65,000 followers there. We're going to be going live on that channel as well as we go through this whole AP season. So the final thing on key concept 7.3 is the 2 world wars, participation in a series of global conflicts, i.e. the Spanish-American War of 1898, World War I from 1917 is when we entered to 1919 when the treaty is signed, to the World War II, which is from we entered 1941 to 1945. Propelled the United States into a position of international power while renewing domestic debates over the nation's proper role in the world. So this is interesting. At the beginning of this period, the United States was not the world's leading superpower. At the end of this period, it probably wasn't either, but it really took a quantum leap from like, okay, a country that's trying to establish all of these different, a country that's trying to establish itself on the global scene to a country that had fully established itself. A couple of key terms. Again, we saw the second industrial revolution. This is a movement in manufacturing that drove America's cities. We had steel, we had industry, we had all of these goals. Progressive. Now, progressive, lowercase p progressive, means sometimes basically liberal, right? Or not conservative or not Republican. Capital P progressive is the movement about 100 years ago of people who wanted to reform cities, who wanted to reform rights for women, who wanted to readjust society. So the progressive movement achieved things like the direct election of US senators, the women's right to vote, the reform, the creation of the Food and Drug Administration. The progressive movement took basically America from a kind of an unregulated space to something that most of us, even today, if you're not lowercase p progressive, are enthusiastic about. For example, child labor laws. So all you children who are here in the chat with me can get jobs starting at the age of 14. Why don't you get jobs in a factory when you're at the age of 6? Or 8. You're not allowed to do that according to US law because of what the progressive era achieved. And when you crack open an egg or you drink a glass of milk or you eat some salad, those foods are being regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. Quick check in the chat. What is the famous novel that was written, not novel, but book that was written in the early 20th century that depicted the abuses of the meatpacking industry? It was so disgusting, the meatpacking industry of Chicago and all over the United States, that like vermin, rats would get ground up into sausages and into like meats that people would consume. And that galvanized the movement to like, no, ground beef and raw eggs and raw milk need to be regulated really effectively. And a lot of you are getting this. This is Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. And it's a very important idea, I think, or sort of moment that did this. Now, somebody did mention Upton, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is the book that actually launched a lot of abolitionists. This is Harriet Beecher Stowe in the 1850s that's setting up that reform movement. So Americans are persuaded by books. Here's another one. Here's another quick trivia one. What is the book that helped launch the modern environmentalist movement? That involved basically the effects of pesticides destroying animal life, and therefore killing off all the squirrels and birds that we would hear every springtime. It's a clue in the title there. This next period, period 8, is the final domain in which you can see something from the DBQ, which is the period of what we know is the Cold War. And this image, this is the world I knew when I was growing up as a kid, was the Soviet Union, the communists, versus the righteous capitalists of the United States. And yes, I'm seeing Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which was a novel that helped really not a novel, but a book that launched the modern environmentalist movement. So again, these study guides, if you're not sure they're pinned at the chat, but I'm going to pop this into the chat for you all. Go ahead and download these. These are free. You can study them right after this, especially on my California and my Pacific Coast people. It's only 5:41. You have plenty of time to benefit from this. On our site, I will point out, we also have a score predictor that shows you how to predict your score based on your practice test results. We have a free practice test. And other resources that are all just available for you. So, and I was also pointing out like this, we're going to go live on our YouTube, on our TikTok channel later. And I think I did one here on APUSH resources for you all. So this period is the Cold War. And basically, let's go through these 3 key concepts over here. Actually, let's go through the timeline. So World War II ends in 1945. In 1947, the president announces the Truman Doctrine to help contain the spread of communism. The focus of the US federal government became, we need to stop the spread of communism in other countries, which is going to define the next 40 years. In Korea, the United States got involved in the Korean War in the early 1950s. In the 1960s and 70s, the United States got involved in Vietnam. In the 1960s and 70s and 80s, the United States intervened in almost 60 countries. The CIA would take out a world leader. The United States sold arms. The United States intervened in Afghanistan behind the scenes. It intervened in Iraq in the 1970s and 80s, in Grenada and Nicaragua, and all through Southeast Asia. It intervened through the Marshall Plan in the 1940s, pumping money into Western Europe to prevent communism. So an incredibly transformative moment of American history in which the US government as a superpower is actively getting involved in all these things around the world. So we see the United States conducting its first hydrogen bomb test. The United States famously dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 to help end World War II. It begins expanding its nuclear arms and experimenting with hydrogen bombs in this period. 1954, people were asking about famous Supreme Court decisions. This is the one you want to know. 1954, Thurgood Marshall from the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, advocates on behalf of 4 different lawsuits that were brought to end school segregation. And they argued that why should you allow 2 different unequal systems in which white students get access to the best schools and the best teachers and the most money and the best buses, and Black students are left with lesser resources. By separating the 2 groups, you create a fundamental inequality. That was the idea that Brown versus the Board of Education embraced. And what Supreme Court decision, this is a good trivia question for our chat, let me know, what Supreme Court decision was overruled by Brown versus the Board of Education when it said you cannot have separate but equal? Segregation is always bad, it's always racist, it's always at the diminishment of one race in the service of another. And so let me know, yeah, I'm hearing it right now. Some people getting Plessy v. Ferguson from 1896, which did uphold segregation, was now replaced with Brown v. Board, which ended segregation once and for all. The Cold War almost turns hot in the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s. This is an example of American intervention abroad. You're seeing what's happening in period 8, everyone. This is the challenge of this time period. You have both a Cold War and a civil rights movement going on at once. So United States society transformed so much after World War II that the United States was a global superpower, and it had to or decided to deal with all of these different conflicts around the world, Korea, Vietnam, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the other ones I mentioned. And there's this upheaval of throwing off 1950s kind of suburban whatever culture and embracing civil rights, a sexual revolution, a transformation of American society that really is probably the most rapid social change in American life. Maybe only rivaled by what we've experienced in the last 10 or 15 years with social media and everything else. So this period, I'm going to come back to it, period 8, is two separate stories: the story of the Cold War and the story of civil rights. If you feel overwhelmed by these, if you got behind them in your class, that's okay. I think tonight, given how late this is, you're going to want to make sure that you're focusing on what you can get out of this time period. It might be more beneficial to just grab one of these two domains for period 8. So the last thing I want to point to is period 9. That's the period that we're in right now. The most transformative moment in a world history, maybe, nobody knows. And one of the things that kind of kicks this off is the rise of, or actually it's this moment here, the 1980 election, in which Ronald Reagan, the governor of California and a former movie star, destroyed Jimmy Carter from the state of Georgia, and basically had a landslide election. This is the rise of modern conservatism as we know it. And let me just see real quick. Yeah, thank you, by the way. For the most part, this has been an amazing chat and an amazing group of people. And except for some people who are going to be kicked out. So we will go ahead and make sure that we get rid of any of this sort of behavior. But again, if you're liking this video, press that like button, subscribe to our channel, and make sure that you check out the playlist, what I'm going to send you all to after this, that breaks down every single one of these topics. So here's what I want to do real quick. This time period that we're in, it's not fair game for the DBQ. There's very little you're going to see. It's basically 5% of the course. So you're going to see the new conservative movement that appears in this period, who's really defined by Ronald Reagan. You're going to see the major demographic and technological changes, the rise of the internet, the rise of computer technology, the rise of the very thing, like right now, I'm on Zoom into YouTube talking to all of you, and half of you are on a mobile device, or I don't know who's on a, let me know in the chat. Are you on a mobile device right now, or are you on a desktop computer? Because it used to be just desktop computers. Phones were kind of pretty primitive devices, and now they're pretty sophisticated. So that's one of those transformations you want to see as well. And then basically 9.3 is all about September 11th. On September 11th, the terrorist group Al-Qaeda smashed planes into the World Trade Center, into the Pentagon, and attempted to do it into the White House. That basically shattered the kind of post-Cold War America as we knew it. There's a lot more to say about the Cold War, Ronald Reagan, and the terrorist attacks of September 11th. This, of course, is the beautiful memorial they set up of lights where the two towers had once stood. And so here's what I want to say to all of you. It's the night before the APUS history exam. 20-something years ago, I took the APUS history exam. I was really nervous. Remember this, you don't need to get 100% on this exam. In fact, I want you to type in the chat right now, I will not get 100% on this exam. And that is okay, because getting 100% is not actually that great when all you need is 81% or 78% or whatever it is to get a 5. Right? If your goal is to get a 3, you might need only something in the 60s or low 70s, right, to get that score. If you're going into the DBQ, oh no, I didn't get the complexity point, I didn't get the sourcing point, I didn't get this. Who cares, right? You don't need to be perfect on the DBQ to do well in this exam. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be your best self tomorrow. And that is what's going to define your experience. You're going to have an amazing day tomorrow. And in fact, I want you to type that in the chat. I'm going to have an amazing day tomorrow. And you're going to do that because instead of setting the bar so high you can't reach it, you're going to set it right for the goal that you can. It's what we call game theory, right? People like, try to get the gold medal, you actually had a shot at the bronze. Get the bronze, right? Get that bronze medal tomorrow. And that's better than taking 11th place with a broken ankle. Okay, that was a weird analogy. You're welcome. Okay, so what I want to do again is remind you, we have this playlist here, and I'm realizing actually, you know, one of the coolest videos we have on our channel is missing on this playlist. So we're going to add it in. If you go to our channel, you will see that we also have a DBQ walkthrough video, which we put at the top. This actually breaks down everything about the DBQ rubric. There's also a video of, if I did APUSH DBQ, let's see where it shows up, right? Here's my man Heimler, beard and all, great channel. This is me looking bad, but this is actually me walking through writing a DBQ live. So as you look at this video, it's going to show you the best way, or a way, that I'm actually sitting at a table going through a DBQ, writing it in like with the papers out. And I didn't really prep this. I actually sat there and then wrote it live. So all of this is here for you as a tool to help you through this. Of course, you got Tom Richey's channel. You have Steve Heimler's channel with tons of resources at your disposal. Instead of focusing on everything, focus on the things that you can control. So as we go through the study guide pack, again, this study guide is in the chat. I'm going to push this right here. And it sounds like, yeah, people are feeling good. I guess we also want the dog back. I don't know. Give me some, if you guys give me 12 million sheep emoji in the chat, I'll bring the dog back on before I get onto the live for AP Euro. These study guides are available on our website. I've pinned them to the top of the chat. And they really break down the entire course. So if you're overwhelmed, what do I do? This guy showed me 53 things. Go here, grab this free study guide pack. It will help you get ready for the test and bring this thing. So, and Marco, I don't know. I don't see very many of those fluffy emojis. The other thing I wanted to point out again, check out our AP resources here on TikTok, because I'm going to be going live there later as well. Okay, there's enough sheep coming in. Let's bring them in. Okay, here we go. So one more time, everyone, brace yourselves. Oh, Marco, 1,000 people. I literally want to see you right now. Come on, buddy. Give them a smile. See, this is the face, everyone, of a procrastinator, somebody who sleeps too much, who is an underachiever. He doesn't know what the Gilded Age is. He doesn't know what a DBQ is. This man will not get the contextualization point, but he's going to do his best tomorrow at 8 a.m. So that's Marco. I'm John. I hope that this has been helpful for you. I want to encourage you, stick around on this YouTube channel called Marco Learning. We've got these breakdowns of everything that, here's me actually writing a DBQ on the Reconstruction. You've got tons of resources available. So I hope you all have a wonderful night. Thank you for liking this video, for subscribing to our channel, and best of luck to you tomorrow. Come back to this video in the comments and let us know how it went. Let me know on our TikTok or Instagram accounts at Marco Learning. We've got tens of thousands of other AP students are here. So